Hey Dylan, this is Dr. Scott. I have some feedback for you on your Essay 2 draft. Just as a quick reminder, in the draft and for the revision, I'm looking at four main criteria. The first one is your ability to write a thesis statement that is focused, it's debatable, it's interesting. I'm also looking at your ability to use details from the murals and from a couple sources. You should use 2 quotes. I'm looking at your ability to use those details in that source material to support your thesis statement. I'm also looking at your ability to organize your essay and use transitions. An organization means that you're grouping similar ideas together, but then you also have a good reason why you're moving from one idea to another. Transitions help there, but it also helps to have a reason for why you're locating paragraphs in the place that you have them, or ideas in the place that you have them. Finally, I'm looking at your ability to integrate sources. Right now, it doesn't appear that you have sources, and you didn't have this as a Word or PDF document attachment, so this is just me pasting in what was submitted through Blackboard. I have some comments over to the right. I'm just going to explain them. They're just quick notes to myself to remind me to talk to you about certain issues. So you have your thesis statement here. Quality of togetherness can bring together the city in the good times or bad times. These murals demonstrate togetherness by the use of color and people in the mural. I think you need to weigh in and say whether or not you felt that they were successfully used to get that idea of togetherness across. But that togetherness issue is something that really kind of works. I think you're using 2 very different murals, and I think the murals also need to get into the thesis statement. So these murals need to get spelled out. The 37th Flood and the Spartans mural. They show togetherness, but they show togetherness in very different ways. And I think getting that into the thesis statement would make it more specific, maybe make it more interesting, and make it more arguable. Right now, there's not much of an argument to it, but I think that you're suggesting it more in your body paragraphs than you're actually giving yourself credit for in the thesis statement. Okay, so what I'm noticing is that you have Mural 1, Mural 2, Mural 1, Mural 2, and you've kind of separated these paragraphs out as individual paragraphs. I think in order to give your essay a bit of depth, right now it's just kind of observations about the 2 murals. The argument isn't that strong at this point. I think in order to give your essay some depth, I think getting the 2 murals together in the same paragraph gives you something to talk about, to compare, contrast, talk about that overall message of togetherness, and talk about the different ways that togetherness is represented here. So I don't think it's going to be too helpful to have the 37th Flood separated out from the Spartan mural, whether you're talking about colors or the characters in the murals. I think they kind of need to come together. I do think you might want to think about the different ways or the different impacts that color and characters has on that message of togetherness. So, yeah, I completely agree that togetherness is definitely shown through those 2 different ways, but they're very different ways, and they might be getting at different ideas of togetherness, and that really hasn't kind of been spelled out and discussed just at this point. The individual paragraphs, what I'm noticing is there are some times where you'll list a bunch of details and at the end you'll say this is equals togetherness. I think that needs to happen throughout your examples, and it might mean that you have to cut the number of examples you use, go into more detail with the examples that you have left, and you explain how they connect to that paper's overall thesis statement or the paragraph's overall point. That's a really important thing to address in the revision, so if you need to go back and listen to that again, do that, because that for me I think is job 1 in your revision. Using more detail, but cutting out the number of examples, and then explaining how those examples relate to your paper's overall thesis statement. And it might be that you have more than 1 or 2, so you might have Spartan, example 1, example 2, where you have a lot of detail, but after each example, you have a fair bit of discussion about how that relates to the paragraph's overall point, which is ultimately about supporting the paper's overall point, which is that thesis statement. So just having kind of like a example equals that, which you kind of have here, example equals togetherness. What needs to happen is like example, togetherness, and we need to bring these paragraphs together. Right here, there's not really a mention of the word togetherness. in this paragraph. So the connection to me is kind of lost in the paper's overall point. Again, they're doing it in different ways, which is really interesting. The Spartans mural, like the colors there are showing togetherness. Yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of, I mean, and then the 37 Flood color, like they're all experiencing the same kind of pain. The color kind of represents that, you know, that darkness that the town goes through is all experiencing together. I think that's kind of interesting to think about, like the different ways that they show togetherness through the use of colors. I think this is the same feedback that I provided earlier, giving us some discussion of togetherness at the end of the paragraph. I think it needs to happen throughout, and there should be more, not necessarily more examples in the body paragraphs, but more detail. So like this sentence right here at the top of the mural, you can see people handing out different goods to one another if they needed anything. To the left, so you're providing, you've got 2 or 3 examples here, and then you have a sentence at the end that just says all this equals togetherness. I think one or 2 examples, the ones that you think are most powerful, maybe ones that are going about showing togetherness in different ways. You know, at the very top, where everybody's in the line to get clean water, that's a very different kind of togetherness than the left side of the mural where Bessie Tomlin is being rescued by the people in the rowboat. Different ways that togetherness is shown, different actions that those characters are going through. Togetherness is shown in different ways. So maybe you choose 1 or 2 that have different ways of representing that togetherness through the characters, and you use a lot more detail and you use a lot more explanation to connect those examples to your paragraph's overall point. I think the same goes for this paragraph here. This is a draft, and I get it's not, you're still kind of working some things out, and I apologize for the late feedback. Your revision is going to be due a week from today, so it'll be due Monday the 12th. If you need a little bit more time, I can work with you on that, but don't be shy about asking me questions. There's a lot to do here. You have a ways to go, and I'd be happy to give you some feedback as you're kind of working out your revision ideas. All right, Dylan, that's the feedback I have. Just to kind of summarize, and I'll put a little note down here and I'll start the video again, but I'll give you a little to-do list. So a quick summary of kind of what needs to happen. I think revising that thesis statement is important. It should be more specific, more focused. There should be more of an argument there. I think you're hinting at more argument or a more argumentative idea in the body paragraph, and I think that needs to work its way into the thesis statement. Make sure the body paragraphs are connected to the paper's overall argument. Right now, some of them will just briefly mention togetherness at the end. There's one paragraph where you're not talking about togetherness at all, and that needs to get turned around. The paragraphs should be more about the argument that you're trying to put forward, togetherness, than they should be about the murals. The murals are kind of like just the text that you're using to kind of support your argument, but the argument needs to be much more important in the revision. Get both murals in the body paragraphs. I think that's a must. What I'm finding is that a lot of folks, when they talk about one mural in one paragraph and another mural in another paragraph, they just kind of list examples, and then they say, yeah, they're related. And that's kind of what's happened in your draft. Finally, less examples and more detail. You're talking about really good examples, but I think you need to be a little bit choosier. I think you need to include more detail from the murals, and you need to explain how those examples are related to the paper or the paragraph's overall main point. So that's the to-do list going forward. Again, if you've got questions, don't be shy about asking me. I'd be happy to help you out. And again, your revision is due Monday the 12th. All right, that's it for now, Dylan. I'll talk to you soon.